Let me start with something that happened to me back in 1987. I was 23 years old, working the midnight freight run between Denver and Kansas City. It was a job most guys didn't want because of the hours, but I liked the quiet, the solitude. That night in October, I was pulling 15 cars, mostly empty, heading back east to pick up grain shipments. The manifest said car number 7 was sealed and out of service. Had been for 2 years, ever since the accident. About 2 hours into the run, somewhere outside of Limon, Colorado, I started hearing this sound. At first, I thought it was just the usual train noise. You know how it is, metal expands and contracts, joints settle, wheels find their rhythm on the track. But this was different. It was coming from behind me, a steady creaking, like someone rocking back and forth in an old chair. But we were on a freight train. There were no chairs. There were no passengers. I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept going. Creak, creak, creak. Always the same rhythm, never stopping. I picked up my radio to call dispatch, just to have someone to talk to. Sometimes the isolation gets to you out there, and your mind starts playing tricks. But when I keyed a microphone, I heard something that made my blood go cold. There was a voice in static, faint, but definitely human. It sounded like someone saying numbers, like they were counting. 14, 15, 16. I put the radio down and listened to the train. The creaking was still there, but now it seemed louder, more deliberate, like whatever was making it wanted me to notice. I should have just kept driving, should have minded my own business, and delivered my cars like I was paid to do. But curiosity got the better of me. At the next switching station, I stopped the train and grabbed my flashlight. I had to know what was making that sound. Had to see car 7 for myself. The night was cold and clear. No moon, but enough stars to see by. I walked back along the cars, counting them off. 1, 2, 3. My footsteps crunching on the gravel between the tracks. Car 7 looked just like all the others from the outside. Standard freight car, painted that faded yellow they used back then. But the doors were sealed with heavy chains and padlocks. There were warning signs riveted to the metal. Danger, do not enter, and out of service by order of railroad authority. But the creaking was definitely coming from inside. I walked around the car, looking for any way the wind could be getting in. Maybe there was a loose panel or a broken seal that was causing the noise. But everything looked solid, secure. That's when I noticed the dates on the warning signs. The car had been sealed on October 15th, 1985. Exactly 2 years ago to the day. Back in the engine cab, I pulled out my logbook and started looking through the old entries. Every engineer keeps notes about unusual incidents, and I remembered hearing something about an accident involving car 7. I found it on page 43. A report filed by the engineer who had been working this route before me. It was dated October 15, 1985. 3 maintenance workers killed when hydraulic lift failed in car 7. Bodies recovered. Car sealed pending investigation. The investigation had been closed 6 months later. Mechanical failure. No one to blame. Just a tragic accident. But according to my logbook, every engineer who had pulled car 7 since then had reported the same thing I was hearing. That rhythmic creaking. Always at night. Always on the anniversary. I was about to start the train again when my radio crackled to life. This time, the voice was clearer. 34, 5, 36. I grabbed the microphone. Dispatch. This is engine 447. Are you trying to reach me? Silence. Then 37, 38. Who is this? Identify yourself. The counting stopped. For a moment, there was only static. Then a new voice came through, different from the first. Older. Webb. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Yeah, this is Webb. Who is this? You need to get that car to Denver. Tonight. What car? Who am I talking to? But the radio went dead. Just static and interference. I sat there for a long time, staring at the radio. Finally, I started the train and got back on the main line. I had a schedule to keep, and dispatch would want to know why I was running late. But the creaking didn't stop. If anything, it got louder as we picked up speed. And now I could hear a pattern to it. 3 short creaks, then 3 long ones, then 3 short again. It took me a while to realize what it was. Morse code, S-less. The rest of that run passed in a blur. I kept the radio turned up, hoping to hear that voice again. But there was nothing, just the usual chatter between dispatchers and other trains on the line. When I pulled into the Denver yards at 6 in the morning, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept in 22 hours, and my nerves were shot from listening to that creaking all night. But as soon as the train stopped, the sound stopped too. I filled out my incident report and submitted it to the yard supervisor. He read it, shook his head, and filed away with all the others. Apparently, I wasn't the first engineer to report strange sounds from Car 7. What happened to those maintenance workers? I asked him. He looked up from his paperwork. You don't want to know, son. Some things are better left buried. But I did want to know, so I went to the Railroad Archive office and requested the accident report. What I found there still gives me nightmares. The 3 workers had been doing routine maintenance on the car's hydraulic loading system. The lift was supposed to be locked in the down position, but somehow it activated while they were underneath it. The first worker was crushed instantly. The second managed to activate his emergency radio before the lift came down again. And the third worker survived for almost an hour, trapped under machinery. The emergency team could hear him on the radio, but they couldn't get to him. The lift was too heavy to move without special equipment, and that equipment was 2 hours away. For 58 minutes, that man counted out loud, counted every minute he was trapped, waiting to be rescued. The radio transcript recorded every word. 1, 2, 3, he made it to 58. Then the radio went quiet. I never worked another run with Car 7 attached. Whenever I saw it on my manifest, I'd call in sick or trade shifts with another engineer. But I heard from other guys on the crew that the sounds continued, always on October 15th, always the same pattern. 3 voices counting, taking turns, just like they did on that last night in 1985. The railroad finally scrapped the car in 1992, cut it up and sold it for metal. But the guys who worked that job said they could hear creaking sounds even as the cutting torches broke it apart. Some sounds, they said, don't die easy. I was 20 years old and a junior at NYU. Spring break was coming up, and I decided to take the train home instead of flying because it was cheaper and I liked watching the country go by. I boarded the Silver Star at Penn Station around 9 p.m. It was a Thursday night in March, so the train wasn't very crowded. Maybe 30 or 40 passengers total in the car I was in. I had a window seat about halfway back, and I settled in with a book and my iPod. The plan was to sleep through most of the trip and wake up in Richmond where my parents would pick me up. Everything was normal for the first couple of hours. I read for a while, dozed off, woke up when we stopped in Philadelphia. A few more passengers got on, but my car was still mostly empty. It was somewhere around midnight when I first heard the sound. At first, I thought it was just a train settling as we went around curves. Passenger cars are different from freight cars. They have more wood paneling, more things that can shift and creak. But this sound was coming from behind me, from the car attached to the back of mine. I turned around and looked through the glass door that connected the cars. The lights were off in there, and I couldn't see much, but I knew that car was supposed to be out of service. The conductor had announced it when we left New York. Due to maintenance issues, car 2850 is closed to passengers tonight. Please remain in your assigned cars. But if the car was empty, what was making that creaking sound? I tried to ignore it and get back to my book, but the sound kept going. It wasn't random like you'd expect from a train settling or swaying. It had a pattern to it, like someone was walking back and forth or rocking in a seat. I put in my earbuds and turned up my music, but I could still hear it underneath the songs. That steady creak, creak, creak. About 20 minutes later, the conductor came through my car, checking tickets and making his rounds. He was a middle-aged black man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. His name tag said Robert. "Excuse me," I said as he passed my seat. "The car behind us, is it really empty?" He looked back toward the rear door, then back at me. "Yes, miss. Car 2850 is out of service tonight." "Why do you ask?" "I keep hearing noises from back there. Creaking sounds." Robert frowned. "What kind of sounds?" "Like someone walking around. Or maybe furniture moving." He looked concerned. "Let me check on that. But I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. Old trains make all kinds of noises." He walked to the rear door and peered through the glass into the dark car. I watched him try the door handle, but it was locked. He took out a ring of keys and unlocked it, then stepped inside for a moment. I saw his flashlight beam moving around in there. Then he came back out, locked the door again, and walked back to my seat. "Everything looks normal," he said. "The car's empty, just like it should be. Maybe what you're hearing is the coupling between the cars. Sometimes those joints creak when we go around curves." But I could tell he didn't really believe that explanation. There was something in his voice, a hesitation, that made me think he'd seen or heard something he didn't want to talk about. After he left, the sound got worse. Not just creaking now, but tapping too, like someone knocking on wood or metal. 3 taps, pause. 3 more taps, pause. I looked around the car to see if any other passengers had noticed, but most of them were asleep. There was an old man across the aisle reading a newspaper and a woman with a baby near the front, but they didn't seem to hear what I was hearing. The baby started crying around 1 a.m., and when the woman got up to walking back and forth, I decided to follow her. I want to get a better look at that rear door to see if I could figure out where the sounds were coming from. As we walked toward the back of the car, the baby got quiet. The woman looked relieved, but I noticed something else. The creaking from the car behind us had stopped. "He doesn't like loud noises," the woman said, bouncing the baby gently. "But he seems to like the train sounds. The rhythm helps him sleep." I nodded, but I was focused on the door to car 2850. Through the glass, I could see shapes in the darkness. Seats, luggage racks, the usual passenger car layout. But something looked wrong. "Ma'am," I said to the woman with the baby, "does that car look normal to you?" She glanced through the glass. "What do you mean?" "The seats. Don't they look like they're facing the wrong way?" She looked again, squinting into the darkness. "I can't really tell." "Why?" But I could tell. In every passenger car I'd ever been in, the seats faced forward, toward the direction of travel. But in car 2850, they seemed to be arranged differently. Some faced forward, some backward, and some were turned to face each other across the aisle, like someone had been moving them around. Robert, the conductor, appeared behind us. "Is everything all right back here?" The woman with the baby smiled. "Just walking him to sleep. He's being good now." Robert looked at me. "Still hearing those sounds, miss?" Actually, they stopped, but I noticed something about the seats in that car. They don't look right. He peered through the glass, and I saw his expression change. Just for a second. He looked genuinely worried. "I'm sure it's fine," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sometimes maintenance crews leave cars in different configurations when they're working on them." "Can I take a look inside?" "No, I'm sorry. Passengers aren't allowed in out-of-service cars. Railroad policy." But as he said it, I noticed his hand was shaking slightly as he held his flashlight. The woman with the baby went back to her seat, and Robert continued his rounds. I stayed by the rear door for a few more minutes, watching the dark car. That's when I saw the lights. At first, just one overhead light flickered on for a second, then went out. Then another one, 3 seats down. Then another on the opposite side of the aisle. It looked like someone was walking to the car, and the lights were turning on as they passed underneath them, then turning off again after they moved on. But I couldn't see anyone in there. The creaking sound started up again too, but now they seemed to match the pattern of the flickering lights. Creak when a light turned on, silence when it turned off, then creak again when the next light flickered. I ran back to my seat and grabbed my phone to record what I was seeing, but by the time I got back to the rear door, everything was dark and quiet again. I took a few pictures through the glass, but all I got were dark, blurry images of empty seats. The rest of the night passed slowly. I dozed off around 3 a.m. and woke up when we pulled into Richmond at 7:30. My parents were waiting on the platform, and I was so happy to see them that I almost forgot about the strange car. Almost. As I was getting off the train, I mentioned the sounds to Robert. He was standing by the door, saying goodbye to passengers. "That car you asked about," I said. "Car 2850. Has anyone else complained about noises from there?" He looked around to make sure no other passengers were listening, then leaned in close. "Between you and me," he said quietly, "that car has a history. We try not to use it on passenger runs, but sometimes we don't have a choice." "What kind of history?" "There was an accident a few years back, a derailment outside of Petersburg. Several people were killed, and that car was, well, it took the worst of it. They rebuilt it and put it back in service. But ever since then, we've had reports of strange sounds, lights turning on by themselves, that sort of thing. Most of the crew won't work trains that have 2,850 attached. Then why is it still being used?" Robert shrugged. "Railroad doesn't like to throw away expensive equipment just because of superstitions. They figure if we keep it out of passenger service and just use it for deadheading, it's not hurting anyone." Deadheading. Moving empty cars from one place to another. No passengers, no crew in the car itself. As I walked away with my parents, I turned back to look at the train one more time. Car 2850 was still attached to the rear, dark and silent, but I could swear I saw a face in one of the windows. I'm a creature of habit. Always have been. I like routines, predictable schedules, knowing what to expect from my day. That's probably why I always took the same train to work. The 7:47 a.m. northbound from San Jose to San Francisco. Car 1243, seat 15A, window seat on the right side, so I could see the bay as we crossed the water. For 3 years, that was my routine. Same seat, every single weekday morning. I'd read the news on my phone, drink my coffee, maybe take a nap if I was tired. It was boring, but I liked boring. Boring meant safe. Boring meant nothing unexpected could happen. The sound started on a Tuesday in September. At first, I thought someone in the car was eating something crunchy, like chips or an apple. You know how it is on commuter trains. Everyone's eating breakfast, drinking coffee, getting ready for work. But this sound was different. It wasn't eating. It was more like creaking, like old wood under pressure. I looked around the car to see where it was coming from, but I couldn't pinpoint it. The train was full, like always. Business people in suits, students with backpacks, workers in uniforms heading to construction sites. Nobody seemed to notice the sound except me. It continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped when we pulled into the Millbrae station. I figured it was just something mechanical, maybe a loose panel or a worn bearing in the wheel assembly. The next day, same thing, same sound. Starting about 20 minutes into the trip and stopping when we reached Millbrae. By the third day, I was starting to get annoyed. The creaking was interfering with my routine. I couldn't concentrate on my reading or relax enough to take a nap. I started paying closer attention to when it happened, always between the San Mateo and Millbrae stops, always for about 10 minutes, always the same rhythmic pattern, like something swaying back and forth. On Friday of that first week, I decided to change seats. Maybe sitting somewhere else in the car would help me figure out where the sound was coming from. I moved to seat 12C, across the aisle, and 2 rows forward from my usual spot. The sound followed me. It was even louder in the new seat, not just creaking now, but a subtle groaning sound too, like metal under stress. I looked around the car again. Still nobody else seemed to notice. A woman next to me was on a conference call. A teenager across the aisle had his headphones on. An old man by the window was doing a crossword puzzle. All normal, all oblivious, but the sound was getting stronger every day. By the second week, I was dreading my morning commute. The sound wasn't just annoying anymore, it was unsettling. There was something almost deliberate about it, like it was trying to get my attention. I started keeping a log on my phone, recording when the sound started and stopped, what they sounded like, how loud they were. September 16th, 7:58 a.m. to 8:08 a.m. Rhythmic creaking, moderate volume. September 17th, 7:58 a.m. to 8:08 a.m. Creaking plus metallic groaning, louder. September 18th, 7:57 a.m. to 8:09 a.m. Multiple sounds seems to be getting closer. That last entry worried me. Seems to be getting closer. I'm not sure why I wrote that, but it felt true. Like whatever was making the noise was moving toward me, day by day. On September 19th, I was running late and almost missed my train. I had to sit in a different car entirely. Car 1241, near the front of the train. No sounds. The ride was quiet and peaceful, just like my commutes used to be, but the relief didn't last long. The next Monday, I was back to my regular schedule, back in car 1243, and the sound were waiting for me. This time, there were new elements to the noise. Along with the creaking and groaning, I could hear what sounded like metal scraping against metal, like something was being dragged across the floor of the train car. I looked down at the floor around my feet, but I didn't see anything unusual, just the standard carpet and metal flooring that every commuter train has. But the scraping sound continued, matching the rhythm of the creaking. That night, I couldn't get the sounds out of my head. I kept hearing them even after I got home from work. While I was making dinner, watching TV, trying to fall asleep, that rhythmic creaking and scraping played on a loop in my mind. I decided to do some research. I went online and searched for information about Caltrain car 1243. It took some digging, but I eventually found what I was looking for in a Bay Area transit forum. There had been an accident on September 19th, 2016, exactly 3 years before I started hearing the sounds. Car 1243 had been involved in a derailment near the San Mateo station. According to the accident report, a mechanical failure had caused the car to separate from the rest of the train while traveling at 45 miles per hour. It had skidded along the tracks for nearly half a mile before coming to a stop. 7 passengers had been injured. 1 had been killed. David Martinez, age 34, software engineer from San Jose. I stared at the screen for a long time, reading and rereading that name. David Martinez. My name. It had to be a coincidence. Martinez is a common name, especially in California, and there are a lot of software engineers in the Bay Area, but the details were too specific. Same age, same job, same commute route. I called the Caltrain customer service line and asked to speak to someone about the 2016 accident. After being transferred 3 times, I finally got connected to a supervisor who was willing to talk. Yes, I remember that incident, she said. Very tragic. The passenger who died was a regular commuter, always took the same train, same car, same seat. Which seat? There was a pause. I'd have to check the records. Why are you asking? I think I might be sitting in the same spot. I've been hearing strange sounds, and I want to know if there was a connection. Another pause, longer this time. Sir, can I ask your name? David Martinez. Silence on the other end of the line. Sir, are you still there? I'm sorry, she said, and her voice sounded shaky. I think there's been some kind of mistake. Could you repeat your name, please? David Martinez. I take the 747 northbound from San Jose every weekday morning. The line went dead. I tried calling back, but every time I gave my name, They would put me on hold and then disconnect the call. The next morning, I almost didn't take the train. I considered calling in sick or driving to work instead. But I needed my job, and I couldn't let some weird coincidence control my life. I boarded the 747, but instead of sitting in my usual seat, I found an empty spot near the back of car 1243. The sound started right on schedule, but now they were different. Instead of just creaking and scraping, I could hear what sounded like voices. They were too faint to understand, but they had the rhythm of conversation, like two people talking quietly to each other. And they seemed to be coming from seat 15A, my usual seat. I moved closer, pretending to look for something in the overhead compartment. The seat appeared to be empty, but the sounds were definitely coming from that location. As I listened, the voices became clearer. I couldn't make out individual words, but I could tell that one voice was asking questions and the other was answering, like an interview. The conductor's voice came over the intercom, announcing the next stop, but his words sounded strange, distorted, like he was speaking underwater. And I realized that wasn't the current conductor's voice. It was older, different, like a recording from years ago. Everything went quiet. The train sounds, the voices, even the normal conversations of the other passengers. It was like someone had turned down the volume on the entire world. I looked around the car. The other passengers were still there, still moving, still going through the motions of their commutes. But I couldn't hear any of it. Then, clear as day, I heard my own voice. I take the 747 northbound from San Jose every weekday morning. Car 1243, seat 15A. It was me talking, but I hadn't said anything. My mouth was closed. My lips weren't moving. Same routine for 3 years. Same seat, same time, same route. The voice was coming from seat 15A. I walked over and looked down at the empty seat. There was nothing there. No person, no recording device, nothing that could be making those sounds. But I could still hear my voice, answering questions that I couldn't hear. Yes, I like the routine. It's predictable, safe. A different voice started asking questions. The words were muffled, like they were coming from underwater, but I could tell it was an interview format. Question, then my voice answering. Question, answer. Question, answer. The accident? No, I don't remember much about the accident. Everything happened so fast. I felt the car separate from the train. The whole car started shaking, tilting to one side. People were screaming. I had never been in a train accident. I had never given this interview. But somehow, I was hearing my own voice describing things I had never experienced. The car skidded for what felt like forever. I could hear metal scraping against the tracks. That's the sound I remember most. Metal on metal, like the world was tearing apart. I tried to get out of my seat, but the force of the skid kept pushing me back. I could see other passengers being thrown around. I wanted to help them, but I couldn't move. The scraping sound got louder, and I felt the train car start to shake. But when I looked around, none of the other passengers seemed to notice. They were still reading their phones, drinking their coffee, completely oblivious. The last thing I remember was seeing the emergency responders through the window. They were trying to get into the car, but something was blocking the door. I kept trying to tell them where I was, but they couldn't hear me. It was like I was invisible. The train pulled into the Millbrae station, and the sound stopped abruptly. The normal noise of the train returned. Conversations, announcements, the hiss of the doors opening. I sat down in the nearest seat, my hand shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I'd heard, trying to make sense of it. The voice had sounded exactly like me, but it was describing an accident I'd never been in. An accident that had happened 3 years before I started taking that train. Unless I went back to my computer and searched for more information about the 2016 accident. This time, I looked for passenger lists, survivor interviews, anything with more detail about who had been on that train. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a news article from the San Francisco Chronicle, dated September 20th, 2016. Caltrain derailment kills 1, injures 7. The article included a photo of the accident scene. Car 1243. Tilted on its side next to the tracks, emergency responders working to extract passengers. And there was an interview with one of the survivors, David Martinez, age 31, software engineer from San Jose. But that was impossible. In 2016, I would have been 28, not 31. And I didn't start taking that train until 2019. I called the Chronicle and asked to speak to the reporter who had written the article. She was still working there, and she agreed to meet me for coffee the next day. I remember that story well, she said, looking at a printout article. One of the worst train accidents in.